Hello, word nerds! Happy Sunday and welcome back to the Sunday special. Not a cooking emergency this time. Erin is still trying to wrestle with her internet, so hopefully she will appear for all of us sooner rather than later. We wish her nothing but luck. But today we are talking about how to write mood and tone and working all of those things into your current work in progress and just writing in general. So to kick things off, our question is, what is your favorite mood to write? Do you also feel like that's the mood where your writing is the strongest? So Megan, you can go first.
I think my favorite to write is probably like something spooky is happening, but also there's interpersonal tension. Like people are fighting, but also they're in a haunted house, like that kind of tone. I don't know if I'm the strongest at it in drafting, but I do think I'm good at revising it. So yeah, I just that like everything is helping to ramp up the tension of what's happening where the characters are concerned. I just really enjoy writing.
Kyra, how about you?
I really like the writing, like the very sitcom-y moments where like the most ridiculous thing in the world is happening and the characters are responding to it. Especially if they're being kind of nonchalant about it, like something's just on fire in the background and they're like, so what's for dinner? That kind of situational humor type vibe, I think I like writing.
Yeah, Rachel?
I definitely like writing unsettling things. I feel like unsettling is kind of like a larger umbrella because you can have something that's like funny and unsettling or like creepy and unsettling or like different levels of it. So I just like that like weird, eerie fantasy type stuff. So I end up kind of like putting that in no matter what.
Maybe see if Erin magically appears. She's closer now, but not quite. Yeah. For me, I think like kind of an anxious tone of like when your character's more in their head and like whether or not that anxiety is justified in the situation, but like that character overthinking things and trying to balance out like not just monologuing on the page. But I enjoy writing that. I think that's probably what I do well because I have a lot of experience there. But so yeah, I think that's it for me. But like coming up with questions for this chat, it was hard to come up with like, I don't know. I don't like there's so many moods, but I don't feel like I know that much about writing a lot of them. Like I probably don't think about this enough. Like, cause like I feel like when I was thinking about like dread and hope and those kind of things and like adventure-y moods, I feel like I have a handle on, but there's so many more moods and I don't know if I consciously know how to put all of them into a book.
Yeah. I feel like I'm really good at writing the mood that I'm in, which is difficult. Because like I had this one book that I've tried, it's been on my back burner for so long because when I started writing it, I had a really like angry main character. And so everything, she was like always so in a mood and she was angry and she was, like stomping around and doing stuff. And I'm like, but I haven't felt angry in a really long time. So I haven't written that in a really long time. Or just kind of in general of like, oh, this is like a fun story. But I'm like, I don't really want to write about that right now. So it's bad to like get them all together. I have trouble with that.
Before we go any further, what do you guys feel is the difference between mood and tone?
So tone
I
is
actually
the
like
language.
Googled this because I wasn't sure.
This is an answer I'm making up on the spot. Tone is like the language you're actually using. Mood is like the feelings it creates in the reader. So tone for me is like author centric. It's coming from the author, whereas mood is the reaction of the reader, if that makes sense.
I think I agree on mood, but for me, when I was looking it up and kind of where I landed for tone was more of like the POV character. So the kind of the way they're seeing the world and their tone. So, because like I would say what you described is maybe to me more voice, but I honestly don't know if there's a
I made it
answer.
up on the spot, so.
For me, obviously there's no definitive right answer. So let us know what it means to you in the discussion section as well. But for me, mood is going to be kind of like shifting throughout the course of the book. It's like you're going to have a lot of different moods depending on what you're trying to have happen in the scene. But then to me, like the tone is more like the overarching, like this book is going to be spooky. Imagine this book cast in a blue filter. But then the mood is like sometimes we're in the haunted house, sometimes we're in the creepy garden. Like It's all creepy for
Yeah.
me, but different rooms.
Yeah, I like that idea of like having like the book as a whole is one way, and then like characters reacting to it is one way, and then each particular scene is one way.
Yeah, Emma Ward said tone is a setting vibe versus mood is the emotions elicited. And Stephanie said something really similar. Tone is part of setting, whereas mood is character driven.
I don't know, because I feel like there's also like moods where it's meant for the reader instead of the character. I love like those dread scenes of, easier to think of these in like movies sometimes, but like where something's wrong is kind of the mood, even if the character doesn't know something's wrong, like the don't go in the basement moment or whatever. Like the character is oblivious, but the reader knows that like something just feels off, even if you haven't actually given them something. Maybe.
I think you get this too, like it's really easy to point to it in horror. I think Stephanie Perkins does this really well in like her slasher books. Any slasher book really is great at like something is off, but you also get it in things like romances, like the character makes eye contact with the love interest for the first time, and even if they don't like each other, as the reader you're like, wait a minute, hey.
Or like, I mean, you can, like, I think we think of Dread as being like a very like horror dark sort of mood, but you can feel dread also in a contemporary, like there are a lot of them that start with like, they're about to get dumped or whatever, and sometimes, and especially like if the author can do it really well where the character is being blindsided by this person about to dump them, the character doesn't, is probably I'm thinking of like Legally Blonde, where Elle's like getting ready for her date with Warner, and but and she doesn't know that she's about to get dumped, but there are kind of hints to the reader that make us go like, oh well, I don't think this date's gonna go like you think it's going.
Or even thinking like Jenny Han into All the Boys, her book series, you like know that something has happened, and Laura Jean is about to find out that like all of these letters have been sent while she's still oblivious. The tone is set up such that you're like, oh no, your life's about to change.
And again, sometimes that's harder to do in in prose than in a visual medium, or like a movie where you have like the audio cues, and when you're writing a book you don't have like background music.
Yeah, because like Emma Moore had a great comment about using music to inspire the mood while you're writing, and I feel like music is such a nice way to put things in that as writers we don't have access to, because like you can set any tone with music and like have something different like that you would think is typically scary or whatever, but if the music is like, there's ways to do it the opposite, but the music sets the tone so much even if you don't even realize that it's there in the background, whereas we just don't have access to that.
Actually, but Emma Ryan said something else in the comments that I was just going to mention, where she said, a dark and stormy night can be a worrying, terrifying thing to one, but a soothing thing to another. And that's kind of thing of, like, oh, you can be walking through a dark forest at night, but it's like the way you describe it sets the mood. So you could be walking through.
Yeah,
like,
is this a murder forest or a fairy forest?
Yeah, exactly. Or like you could be walking through and be like, oh, the moonlight's so nice, and like look at the stars, and like such a balmy night. Or you could be walking through being like, the trees look like fingers reaching towards me, and it's cold and squishy, and what's that sound? And like you can really like set it that way.
When I was teaching freshman English at a university, we had like kind of a not a unit, a day on this, and we did this exercise where I'd like put up a picture and have them kind of just, my students kind of describe the picture. And my favorite one was this like picture of like this snowy park, and it was in black and white. And I was teaching at a college in Arizona, and so it's like half of the responses were like the kids from Arizona who had hated snow because they grew up in Phoenix, and they're like, it's cold, it's freezing, we're all gonna die with frostbite out here. And then the other half were like these people who like totally romanticize the snow. So it's like, oh, they're gonna like, this would be the perfect place to like go on a romantic date and cuddle up with someone. And it was the same picture that everyone was looking at, but just like people brought such different experiences to it, and that really affected the way they described that picture.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's a good exercise.
Yeah, it was always really fun.
So do any of you have any like least favorite moods, tones, or like anything you really struggle to write? I feel like romance is one for me, of like feeling like romance is in the air separate from what the characters are actually doing. I struggle with that for sure.
I definitely
Grief.
struggle with like weird or awkward moments because I get secondhand embarrassment so fast and so easily. So it's like even if I'm reading something that's like a character getting dumped or something, and I'm like, oh my god,
agreed,
it's so
100%.
good. Like I can't. Oh, don't have they like okay?
I
Have they broken
love
up yet?
writing
Yes,
those.
no. Like it's just like and so I'm really bad at it because I'm like I don't want to write that. It's like so embarrassing, and I know these people aren't even real, but like I don't want to have to write them like tripping in front of their whole school. That's so awkward.
For me, it's grief. I have a hard time writing like a character responding to something very like tragic and sad that's happening to them.
That's my favorite. I like that.
This is why Megan and I write books together.
I didn't even think of that, and I like that. I think I might agree with Vanessa V, who said I struggle with writing comedy. I like having comedy in my books, but it doesn't come like writing a lighthearted, meant to make you laugh scene doesn't come very naturally to me.
This is why Megan and I write books together.
I did read a book. All my books are packed. It's called like The Hidden Tools of Comedy. And it talks about writing comedy. It's more like screenplay focused, but I did find it really, really helpful in novel form as well. Just kind of like learning about what actually makes something funny and how to set a scene in a way that it will be funny and not sound like it's trying too hard. So big recommend for that if you want to read more about having comedy in your books.
I was thinking about this the other day, how like comedy actually is one of the hardest things to write because again, like what makes something funny, and then it's like as I was reading a book that I was like, oh, this is so forced. Like you're trying so hard to make this funny, and like you can't put your finger on like what's wrong, but you're like, this is so awkward, and like you can tell that they're trying too hard. So yeah, it's tricky.
Mm-hmm.
And Griswold said romance is hard to balance. This is too much or not enough. And yeah, I feel that a lot of like it's easy to lean into cheesy with romance, and like depending on what you're trying to write, that could be totally okay, and like what your character loves and all of that. But especially in those earlier scenes of like, especially when your characters don't really know that they're in a romance scene yet, like it's hard to like get those little vibes in with not just the like how your characters are interacting with each other.
It's really easy to do the, oh, my heart fluttered. And you're like,
yeah,
okay, boring. Like I've read it 100 times.
Especially when you're trying to balance those like enemies to lovers or like just anything where they don't know they're falling in love, but everybody else needs to know.
Yeah.
With romance, there's so many like things you can do with setting, though. I mean, like with all of them, but like, the characters, if they, get stuck in a rainstorm, it's like they might not know what's going to happen, but the reader's like, aha, I've seen this before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely knowing the tropes of what you're writing is so important.
Next, a lot of what you're doing with mood or tone or all of it is just signaling to your reader in different things of like, this is how we're feeling. This is what the tension level is, all of those things. So it's all just different tools to use that. So in terms of, I don't remember what we decided to call this, but like your character's mood. Does anyone have any advice for how to convey that with other than dialogue? Because I feel like how your characters speak to each other is a fairly straightforward way to like, they're in a bad mood, short, choppy sentences, that kind of thing. But when you're working on voice or tone or mood or whatever, how do you get across how your character is feeling without spelling it out in other than dialogue?
I think a lot of times how they react to something. So like, if my character's having a bad day, that and someone like, bumps into them on the train, they're maybe going to be less patient than if something really good just happened and you're in one of those moods where it's like nothing is going to bother me today. Mm-hmm. So reaction things going on around them are going to depend a lot on their mood. And it might be totally internal, like it might be that the person bumps into them and either way they're going to say, oh, that's fine, don't worry about it. But internally they're like, this person just bumped into me, or they're like, oh, go on your way, fellow citizen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like that like internal monologue I notice I do it myself. If like I'm in a bad mood, I'm like, this thing would normally not bother me at all, and now I'm like ready to like throw this
Yeah, it's
across
the
the
worst
room.
thing.
Like, yeah.
That's my favorite way to just kind of leapfrog over a plot hole is to just have the character be like, normally I wouldn't do this, but I feel like this. I'm gonna
I'm
fight
mad.
Yeah, I think just definitely thinking about their reactions. I really like the emotion thesaurus. I think that's very helpful. You can search by mood and just be like, I want angry, and it will tell you like this is a list of a million things that someone might do when they're angry, and you can be like, yes, this one.
Joe Catherine says, I bounce from humor to deep, heartfelt discussions where at least one or usually both characters are crying and nothing in between. And then I think of another question I was thinking of before when I was just kind of working through mood and all that and thinking about writing contemporary specifically, but this might be true in other things. It's like, does every scene have, yes, but every scene have a mood? Or is there ever a default mood? Because I was thinking about like writing contemporary specifically, and when I'm writing something that's kind of mundane of like, yes, a plot thing's happening, but it doesn't feel like it yet, of like your characters at school and there isn't always a mood, or is there, and I'm missing it, is there a default mood, or should every scene have a bigger, deeper mood?
I feel like maybe some people are like, oh, I choose a deep mood, but I feel like default mood is really just kind of like, what's the tone of the genre that you're writing? And if like, you don't want it to be distracting. Like I'm trying to set the scene up so you feel a certain way, so much so that you feel like I'm banging you over the head with it. And so it's, I don't know if this is making any sense, but like your default mood is usually just kind of what the genre itself is.
I like that.
At least for me. Again, who knows? Who knows if I know what I'm talking about, but
No, that makes sense. I was thinking something similar of like fantasy book is going to have a quest mood and you're ready for adventure at all costs. And contemporary is going to have that like light, fluffy, everyday kind of thing. So I don't necessarily think you have to be like, in this scene, we're feeling this mood.
Yeah. Because I think about some of the books we talk about a lot of like Harry Potter's default mood is kind of like he's probably going to find trouble soon. And like Katniss's Hunger Games mood is a little angsty when we're not actively rebelling against a government and that kind of thing.
How much of that is the book or the genre, and how much of that is the main character?
I don't know. I feel like dystopian is usually like a little is angst.
I don't know. Like if I read The Hunger Games from Peeta's point of view, would it still feel angsty?
Yes, but with more carbs.
As it should be. But I think it might feel less angsty though, or at least like angsty in a more sad way than an angry way.
Fight to the death pit. I feel like everyone's justified in some angst.
I think everyone's justified. I don't know if as a reader it would feel like it had the same. I'm trying to think of like.
It wouldn't have as much anger, but I think it would still have the angst because he's so very like, I want to be me. Is this real or is this not real?
Yeah, just think about like the default moods of genres. Like to me, dystopian is you have to have a problem with your living situation and want to fix it for it to be dystopian, rather than just kind of like a crummy sci-fi where we're not trying to fix the world, we're just dealing with our personal problems within this crummy sci-fi world.
I wonder if it's like your genre plus your author voice equals your default mood. Like Anna Marie McLemore's books, like they're always going to feel kind of the same, even though they're very different books, but they always have that same, like it feels like a fairy tale, magic realism, just like all of that. And every time you go in, you know you're going to feel those things.
I'm just having an epiphany, like, oh my god, that's so true.
Their books
also,
are so good.
I'm sorry, how do you say their last name?
McLemore?
Is it McLemore?
I'm pretty sure.
I've been saying McLemore for like years. Okay. Oops.
Who is this person? I feel like I haven't heard of this author. We've been talking about them for years, apparently.
Yeah, they wrote like The Weight of Feathers. I just read Dark and Deepest Red.
Oh yeah,
really
Blanca
good.
Roja.
Blanca and Roja.
Yeah, I'm sure if you saw the covers, you know who they are. Very
Yeah,
wonderful
they-
queer non-binary author. They write amazing fairy tales.
Well,
Yeah.
I've had The Weight of Feathers on my shelf for a very long time because
Mm.
we tried to do a thing with that for the Word Nerds a long time ago, but I never actually read it.
Oh, that's right. Oh my gosh, wild.
Yeah, I was just listening to them on the Writer Die podcast talking about how they have a gay Gatsby retelling coming out soon.
Oh, someone tell
I'm very
Helen.
excited for.
Word nerd Helen is very excited about this.
Yes.
They're very like I don't know. I feel like there are not that many classics that you could like. You'd say I'm doing a gay retelling of this, and I wouldn't be like, oh yes, I'm interested.
Yes, I did.
Or is it the thing on TikTok? Like the only like standards I want for books are that it's gay and it slaps. Like, yep, exactly.
There's like an imprint that's doing like queer reimaginings of a
That's
bunch of classics,
what
right?
Anna Marie's is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I need to
Interesting.
look into them since apparently I want that.
Yeah.
And I like it keeps like popping up in like my Twitter, and then I never go like actually look at the books and add them to
I'm
Goodreads.
sorry, where did you just get a baguette? Like, what, is it a taquito? Like, what is
It's a breadstick.
casual breadstick?
Very subtle.
Just a little live chat breadstick.
Yeah. Damn, I forgot my live chat breadstick.
Fool.
Yeah. I really like that idea of like a default tone, even if it like not everyone agrees specifically what it is, but as long as you as the author kind of know how you feel like that default tone should go, that you have at least a starting point for some of those scenes where it's not always exactly clear. I'm just reading through the comments here.
Yeah. People have great insights. Thank you for sharing your insights into this as well.
So it is a tricky topic where even just us trying to define what each of these words means and all having a different kind of take on what that might look like when you're writing. It's tricky to discuss because you're not always talking about exactly the same thing. But
Yeah, it's like we're not beginner writers, but we're talking about this and I'm like, I don't know. Have I heard of this?
yeah, it's definitely one of those. It can be one of those you know it when you see it kind of things. So it's very hard to just like give examples of.
Stephanie said, "Word nerds now with more carbs." Just trying to like channel my inner PETA. Like,
I heartily approve.
yes.
Although, okay, so speaking of giving examples, does anyone have any books that they think do any particular mood or tone very, very well?
I always love questions like this because I immediately forget every book I've ever read.
No, same. I'm like, oh no. Oh no.
This is maybe not the best example because it's not out yet. But it's coming out soon. I recently read Joan He's The Ones We're Meant to Find, and it is a masterclass in that feeling of like something is not quite right. Even when like, I mean, there are times on the page where everything's like falling apart. It's like, yeah, things are not right. But there are also parts where it's like, this seems like it should be at least kind of a neutral zone, but I do not feel good about where this is going. It's an excellent book that everyone should read.
Oh, the cover is so beautiful.
It's so beautiful.
I've been eyeing it for a while.
And it's extremely well written. I think I finished it at like 2 a.m. and then just had to like sit there with my feelings. And it's not out yet, so there's not a lot of people to talk to about it.
I really like Alyssa Cole's romance novels. I think they are great. I think if you're like interested in romance, the genre, that's a great place to start, is Alyssa Cole. The tone is always just like, it's spot on. The people are so different every time, but you know you're going to go in and you're going to feel feelings X, Y, and Z. And I was really interested in seeing how that would play out because she had a new book come out called When No One Is Watching, which was a horror, like a thriller. And so I was like, well, how is that tone going to translate? Is it going to feel like a totally different author? But it was really interesting. All of the voice was still there. It was still equally as compelling of a voice. And so I'm not sure like what the right thing is to pull from that, but I think she just does such a good job of having really compelling characters that feel very relatable, and they like transcend the genre that they are in.
I'm curious for anyone who's read Harrow, how the like voice and tone moves over. Because like so much of
I have
Gideon
feelings
stood
about
out of like, I have not read anything quite like this before, but then Harrow is a different character. So how much did that translate?
God, Harrow was so weird.
I thought that was the biggest thing I struggled with Harrow, was that I felt like the thing that really made Gideon sparkle for me was that it was such a unique voice, and we didn't get that. And my feelings weren't like that for the whole book, but I don't want to elaborate more because I don't want to spoil things.
She happens to know that I have like an hour and a half left in the audiobook of the first one. I messaged her right before chat, so
yeah.
I mean, I guess also for the viewers, but mostly for me. She doesn't want to spoil it.
And it's kind of a case where I did feel like the tone was the same. It was still very blood-soaked, still very weird, but I felt like the mood wasn't quite as whimsical.
Yeah, agreed. That I had by the way, in case anyone's wondering, we're talking about Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, and then the sequel, Harrow the Ninth. And yeah, Harrow, I spent like 2 months reading Harrow because it was so difficult to get through because her voice is so strange. And it's like, you just can't really connect with it.
Super weird.
Yeah, exactly. Like I liked it in theory, especially like looking back. I'm like, oh, she did these things and like we learned this thing and that's cool. But like in the moment, it was really hard to connect with that. Even though the mood was so good. I think that's why I kept going back to it.
Okay,
I'd be interested to see how I like that one, because I like her. Like she's just like a goth queen. She's my favorite character. So
yeah, she's great.
So
I'm trying.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm trying to think of like other series where there are different like POV characters and how that this book is one like, and I'm just struggling to think of one where like each book is a new character, and I know I've read them, I just can't.
Well, I'm gonna bring up something that I was trying not to bring this up, but Crazy Foxy said Raven Boys, and I was like, I was gonna say that, but I didn't want to say that because that's what we always say. But like, it's true. Like, it's so moody, and it's like, oh, it's so good. But I know we like always talk about that, so I was like trying not to bring that up. But it really is like it has such a consistent and build like the consistent mood that build on itself throughout the whole series. That like old magic, something slightly again unsettling. It's a little eerie, historical. You kind of have this like all these visions of people not quite being who they really are. And oh my gosh, I don't know how she does it.
I think Holly Black is another one who very consistently has like an atmospheric sort of, at least the stuff I've read by her. Roshni Chokshi also like comes to mind as having like a very distinct, like it's kind of like very glamorous and glittery with like kind of a dark undertone that I like. I'm still trying to think of. Yeah.
I enjoyed Mirage by Somaya Daoud. It's like kind of fantasy, kind of sci-fi feeling, and I listened to like a first draft podcast episode with the author a long time ago where they talked to each other about the Star Wars prequels and how so much of like the best parts of those inspired that book. And I felt like that really came through. Like the tone was so perfectly aligned with that. I really loved it. And Griswold brought up Mindy McGinnis, which I think is a really interesting author to talk about because she writes every genre, it seems like.
Yeah, I wish Erin were here and her technical difficulties weren't happening because I know she has a lot of stuff to say on Female of the Species, which I'm like staring at it. It's on my TBR shelf. It's been there for like a year and I haven't read it. Everyone's like, you have to do it. It's so good.
So the one I'm reading right now is House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig, and I wish I could explain what was happening, but 12 sisters. A few of them have died already. The family feels cursed. Mansion fantasy. Yes. No. Yeah.
It's like a seafaring gothic.
Yeah.
That's how I've described it.
Yeah.
But
That's a good one. I like that.
I'm really enjoying it, but there's something in the tone that I keep missing because it's also like kind of a ghost story, as you get from the Gothic. And anytime there's like a hint of ghosts, I'm surprised. I'm like, I didn't feel like this is where we were, and now maybe there's ghosts.
Yeah, I felt like a little off about that book too. Like, 12 Dancing Princesses is one of my favorite fairy tales, and it's so, like, it's never used in anything, so I was, like, so excited when I read that. It definitely doesn't have that, like, Gothic vibe, of course, the, like, old decrepit mansion by the sea, but yeah, I felt like it was, like, it kind of teased magic, but then it never really, like, gave it to us. So, like, I think maybe it was a little off, because I kept, like, expecting something to happen, but it didn't.
Yeah, I'm not finished it yet, so I can't really put my finger on why I'm always like, oh,
And
ghosts.
ghosts.
Yeah.
I think I really enjoyed that book. I remember the only thing that kept me from giving it 5 stars was that sometimes, to me, it felt like the YA tropes were like a little too leaned on. If that makes any sense. Like, the world was really unique feeling. I loved the 12 Dancing Princesses being brought in, and then it was like also very classic YA romance feels to it that felt almost at odds with the really unique setting, which I don't want it to sound bad because I do love tropes, and especially like in YA books, you don't want to be like, it was too YA, because that's obviously a problem.
It was just that the very like classic YA romance tropes felt weird with the like
they almost felt
Gothic
too
setting.
familiar for such an unfamiliar setting.
Well, and maybe almost too like the vibes clash.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that might be it.
Because the romance in the, I mean, if I'm remembering correctly, the romance is pretty lighthearted and the rest of the book is not.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I kept being like, surely, like, they're going to turn on each other. Surely. But
I think it's very hard to do like a cute romance in a very dark book. Not impossible, but
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Your sisters keep dying. Let's focus.
Cute boy can wait. Like, yeah.
Surely cute boy should
Priorities.
also be prioritizing the fact that sisters are dying.
Thinking about the Raven Boys got me thinking about one of my like favorite tones that is also, I wish I could capture it better and write it better, of like that kind of adventure is out there spirit. Because we were thinking about ones that do different tones and moods well. The Luminous Dead does like a building dread really well, but there's also a chapter that stuck out for me of like, they were looking back at like this adventuring party that had like gone awry in these caves that they're diving through. And like the adventuring party didn't know they were in trouble yet. So they all felt like, we're just going to do these cool things and check stuff out and explore all these things. And I really liked that mood. And I feel like there's some of that in the Raven Boys as well. Of like, 'cause there's all this moodiness, but like Gansey wants to just go out there and find stuff. And like, there's an excitement in the air kind of thing, which is always fun to read.
Yeah.
I
I think
think
there's
like
a
OG.
part.
Oh, go ahead. That's okay.
I was going to say, I think there's a part in the Raven Boys at some point where someone's like, can't you feel it? And like, as a reader, it's like, I can feel it. And Griswold said, I find that tone is something inherent in the threads of my story idea. This isn't creepy enough when I'm outlining. Is that your experience when starting a new story too?
It's something I'm trying to do more of, because I feel like Maggie Stiefvater mentioned this in her course of like mood is one of the first things she gets into. And like, as she's crafting her idea, it's with a mood in mind. So I've been trying to think more like that moving forward of like, this is the idea, this is the genre, but what does it feel like right from the get-go?
I feel like I go back and like, because I think I develop more of the mood as I write, and then by like halfway or like end point, you know, I have to like go back and then like reintroduce mood to the first half because I haven't built it up enough. I don't think I've ever like gone into it being like absolute mood, like toned down to a T.
I definitely think about it before I start writing. But it is one of those things that I don't put a ton of pressure to figure out everything, but I do consider what are the things that excite me most? What am I most excited to write? And how do I feel about, like, what do I want this project to feel like for me? So like, Kyra and I have this book that we're writing together, and it's like, well, we want it to be a fantasy rom-com. Like, we knew that from the start, which kind of sets a certain number of expectations. And then we also knew we wanted it to feel like you had stepped into like a horror version of Taylor Swift's Me music video.
True, that's what we were working on.
Yeah.
Very,
and so,
very specific.
like, if it ever comes to a point where it's like, oh, well, I don't know what to write right now, I don't know how to set this scene, you can always go back to, like, we didn't figure out every single little thing, but we figured out, well, what would it feel like if we just put like a creepy pastel hue over all of it?
That's really cool.
We like it. We're having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
As per usual. Yeah, I think for me, first drafts are very like, I always have this idea, like I finish writing and it's like there's hints of like, this could be something. But I always feel like I walk away like, well, that's supposed to feel punchier. Like that's supposed to be creepier, or that's supposed to be cuter, or it's like my first drafts are always like the watered down version of what I want them to be.
I think it just takes such a long time to figure out, at least when I'm writing, it takes such a long time to figure out who the character is, and who the character is informs so much of how the book feels and what the book is. So like, going back to a different book Kyra and I wrote, because if you can't tell, my personal writing life isn't going great, but the books I'm writing with Kyra are going great. But we wrote this book like 5 years ago, and it was a serious fantasy, like, you know, classic YA tropes, but dark. My character's a very angry warrior, and you can feel it on every single page. She is mad and has an axe. And after like the third draft,
several axes.
Yeah, lots of axes, and they keep accumulating. And by like the end of the third draft, it was like, oh wait, no, she's not angry, she's just grieving. And that changes so much of how she interacts with everyone. It changes the hue of the book. It makes it so you can have a little more fun, because you're allowed to have fun when you're grieving. You're not really allowed to have that much fun when you're just angry all the time. So it's good to leave yourself room to change things around, I feel like.
Yeah, because my brain's really stuck on like how well Maggie Stiefvater does all of these things. Like Kyra's original, like trying to think of different POV books of like how much that mood shifts between Adam and Blue, and like they all have very specific tones to their chapters while never losing that like overall Maggie Stiefvater vibe. But I'm sure she must have like gone and worked that through in revisions.
For
like
sure.
It could never be that good on the first page. You really have to have such an understanding of your characters in order to like bring through their mood in your writing.
Well, wasn't Gansey like a 40-year-old man in the very, very first imaginings of it?
Oh, wait, really?
Yeah, Gansey was like an actual adult.
Oh my god!
Yeah.
Well, I know for a fact there is a line in there that is somewhere along the lines of like he's a young man trapped in an old man's life, or no, it's like an old man trapped in a young boy's body, or a young man trapped in an old man's life, or like something like that. And I was just like,
Maggie does that a lot with her sentences. It'll be like, it's either this thing or this opposite thing, and then puts them together to make a mood.
So good. I was kind of thinking about this. I don't know. I mean, I think I'm the person here who's read the most Cassandra Clare out of all the word nerds. But I was thinking about that in particular because I just finished reading Chain of Iron, which is her, like, I don't know, 18 millionth book that she's put out. But I really, really enjoyed it. And I haven't, like, fully, like, really invested and enjoyed a Cassandra Clare book like I have with that one in a really long time. Because I think her original trilogy, you know, yes, it has its issues. It's also, like, 15 years old. Or 10 years. What year is it? 10 years old? I don't know. It's been a while.
No.
But like I think people really liked it, and I really liked it because it's like it's sarcastic, it's snappy, it's fun. You know, Jace is very sarcastic. It has amazing one-liners, but it still has that kind of like tropey, like fun, adventure-y, who cares, get a sword, we're all going, that kind of thing. And as her books have come, kind of continued, she still kind of has that vibe. Like, it's definitely matured now, especially in the latest 2 series that she's written. It's definitely like more of the mature, like less kind of like, like, I don't know, zany, whatever characters. But it still kind of has that, like, the scenes that are fun and like quippy, they all have that same vibe. That's not like, it doesn't feel like it's the same all the time, but definitely feels like it's similar. And like all the characters are constantly in that, like, snappy mood. Whereas all her fighting scenes always are like focused on certain things, and they kind of have this overarching, just like similar mood to all of them. And I really, really like it.
Let us know in the discussion section any books that you think have a really strong mood and tone, if you haven't yet. Joe Catherine said, as a side note, I read Geekerella. I read it at work. I read it walking to my car. I had to put my phone in my trunk for the drive home. I forgot to make dinner. I blame you all. It was like astral projecting back into my 15-year-old self.
That's a good book.
See, that's a series where each book has a different narrator.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks.
They're like companion novels. I really want to read Bookish on the Beast.
It's cute.
Yeah.
They do have similar, like, they all feel like part of the same series for sure, even though they're like very different characters.
Is it like a series? So everyone's story is building a little, or versus companion?
A little bit. So I mean, it's almost more one where it's like the character. I mean, that romance thing where the characters make cameos. But they play pretty heavily. So the first one is like Cinderella, where Prince Charming is like an actor on a TV show.
Yeah, I read the first one.
The second one, one of the POV characters is like the actress who plays his love interest in the TV show, and her lookalike, because it's Princess and the Pauper retelling. And then the Bookish and the Beast, it's another, like, the love it, or one of the POVs is another one of the like cast members in that show.
Oh, okay.
I think I realized there was the third one.
Bookish
the Bookish and the Beast. I think the male love interest, isn't he like he's a celebrity, so that makes sense that he's part of that.
He's a celebrity, and he appeared in the other two kind of as like not full antagonist, but he's like the annoying, like, no one wants Beastly. To like. He's the Beastly, yeah.
That's funny.
So I think Bookish and the Beast is probably my favorite of the 3. I don't know. I really liked Geekerella. I liked all of them.
Read it.
That reminds me of Jen DeLuca's Renaissance Fair romance series. It's not a YA, so don't read it expecting it to be a YA. But the first 2, it's like pretty classic heroes and heroines. And then this third one, you are getting like the eccentric side character is now the guy love interest. And I'm very excited for it.
That's a trope of a lot of romance series that I really like. Like, I do not remember for the life of me what it's called. When you have a series that's like 20 books long, and it's surrounding like a group of people, and in every book like one more person gets their love interest. I don't remember what it's called, but I personally really like that when you like bring in like the quirky side character, like the best friend, and you give them the story. I'm like, yeah, it's great. We like that.
And then you get cameos from like the ones that you liked before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, oh, look, they're still happy. That's cute.
Exactly.
Sarah Dessen's books do that, where they're all in like the same city, universe, general area. And so you'll like drive by the restaurant, and like if you've read them all, and High School Megan was very into those.
Actually, I would say Sarah Dessen like has a mood,
Oh yeah.
For sure she has a mood and a tone to all of her books.
Big like 2000s coming of age. It's got Mandy Moore in it. Vibes.
Exactly.
It does have Mandy Moore.
Yeah, Sarah Dessen has Mandy Moore vibes in all the books. Erin, you made it!
I think so.
You're here.
Welcome.
Hi.
Oh man, and Griswold's hitting us with the hard questions. Can you share some examples where tone or mood isn't done well in a story?
All of mine.
I'm sure that's not true. I know your
Yeah, I doubt that.
mood, like that is what I know about your writing.
I find it's easy, and I'm not going to name a certain one, but I've also been going through this thing where I'm trying to find some good, like, new adult books, and it's way more difficult than you expect it to be. And I find, like, those ones that are specifically labeled new adult, for me, really get the mood and tone wrong, because I think they're trying to be too many things, especially with, like, spicy books, like, becoming, like, a really big thing now. It's always, like, this is this dark and moody book, and this love interest needs to be saved, and can the heroine do it? And then it's just this like guy who like calls her some names, and then they just like hook up for a whole book. And I'm like, that's not at all what you're going for. Like, I don't think so. Or it's like they go from like one extreme to the other, and it's like, I don't know.
I think for me, books that try to be like dark and serious just for the sake of being dark and serious, I think this is like my like soapbox that I will get on here for a second. but we have like kind of this cultural like thing where they're like we think that like dark serious stories are better or more important or more literary than like more lighthearted fluffy stories. And I hate that because it's not true. Like dark stuff, like I think about this in terms of like every time they announce a new Batman movie, they're always like, and this one's the darkest one yet. And it's like and it's like not that it can't be done really well as like a dark movie, but it's just like the fact that it's dark doesn't in and of itself make the movie good. And in some ways, it's almost like it's very easy to in fact make it bad by like just trying too hard to make it dark. So sometimes I read things where it's like because they want it to be dark and serious, they'll like give it a kind of unsatisfying ending just because like then it's dark and serious and you know, praiseworthy. And but in a way that it's like this isn't satisfying in terms of like the narrative you set up. Sometimes it like doesn't make sense with like what the characters would do. Sometimes it's just like you didn't have to end it this way. You kind of just made things go bad just for the sake of ending it on a downer note. So that's my pet peeve, and I'll step off the soapbox now.
No, that's okay. I think they almost do the opposite sometimes with, I mean, I think this is more like, you know, early 2000s YA books, like a little bit less now, but that like, oh, this is like this dark, gritty, serious dystopian book, and like everything's awful. And then the ending is like, sunshine and rainbows, we got married, everything's great, the government's been taken down, woo! Like, and then you're like, that's what?
How though?
Where's the PTSD?
How do like
therapy?
Oh, because then the flip side is then like Veronica Roth tried to flip that on its head, and I did not like that she did that. So
yeah, we're not going to talk about that.
That's a whole nother chat.
Exactly.
especially like back then, it felt like the vibe was kind of like, look at us young adults, we can do the thing and take down the government. Like it's definitely progressed since then, but I think back then that was kind of the vibe of like, we're gonna win. Hunger Games did more of the like, we're gonna win and there's like personal consequences.
Yeah,
but
I think you can still do that like hopeful, like we're gonna take down the government and win the day and like everything, you know, we're gonna be together. But like you could do that in a way that's not like, I don't know, complete like genre flip switch at for the very last chapter. You know what I mean?
I feel like maybe you could call it like a bad, you know, pulling off the mood or tone badly, like at the end of that book where we start off feeling like the characters are very heroic and going to save the day, and then it just all falls flat at the end, you know, like I don't know if it was necessarily the mood or tone that went wrong, but something did, because even if you were planning that as the ending, it didn't come off the way it should have, you know.
One of the things that comes to my mind, I also don't feel super comfortable like naming books that I've hated on the internet, but I will say TV things because I don't write for TV. But one of the things I've really been struggling with in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier TV series is that I feel like the mood is a little too uneven from scene to scene in the different episodes. It's like sometimes we're pausing and having like a buddy funny banter moment between Bucky and Sam. And then we're going to shift really quickly back into like blood and fighting. And there's a way to do it well. Like there is a way to intersperse these things really well, but it's when it's like you're having chunks of each tone, it just doesn't quite sit right with me. It feels, and I am enjoying the show. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm still enjoying the show, but it does keep giving me pause that the tones are so in their own compartments.
Yeah, I've run into actually quite a few YA books where it's like, it's very evident that the author was maybe told to put romance in there. And it just seems like it's shoved in there with a crowbar in between the fighting and the stabbing. And you're like, wait, they're stopping to kiss. Like that often seems like, or they're trying to throw a little bit of levity into something dark, which you do need. But if it's not done really well, it can be like, wait, there's like something horrifying in the house. And now he's like joking around. Like, you know, it doesn't seem like a natural human response if you don't do it well, you know?
Yeah.
See, I think my answer to the question is like equally vague, but for different reasons, because I don't have any specific answers of like a book that does mood or tone badly isn't necessarily a book I hated, but it's a book I won't remember. Of like, and like I can see it kind of scrolling through my list of like, I like the plots in some books, but like it's not going to be one that really stands out for me because the mood and tone was lacking. So it wasn't bad, and lots of pieces were still well written, and it's hard to come up with specific answers. It's just like it's just missing something. You know it when you see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very hard to put a finger on.
If the mood and tone was like sort of just shallowly written, then you're not going to remember that.
And there's also sometimes a tone of a book that doesn't work for you as a person, but you know is done well. So, for example, I love the E. Schwab's books. Addie LaRue was not for me. Like, it just wasn't. But I can acknowledge that the tone was very good. I just didn't like it.
Yeah, that book that I just marathoned, What Big Teeth, had a very distinct voice, of course, but also the mood and tone was very, very different. And I feel like that some people that were saying it was almost like they were struggling to try to articulate it in the reviews when they were like, basically they were trying to say, I wish I'd liked this, but I hadn't liked it, and I can't figure out why. And, you know, had the people saying that it was cliche, when to me it was very clearly not cliche. And I'm like, did you maybe just not like these other things and you couldn't pinpoint what it was you didn't like? Because I think that can be quite hard to articulate, that the mood and tone was very bizarre. You know?
Yeah, it was. Well, then, like, again, like, I thought that book's mood and tone was its like shining, like selling feature.
100%.
Yeah, but like I didn't really like the characters, but then like characters weren't bad. Yeah, it's so hard to like.
The characters were also part of the moods though, because they were so weird. Their behavior was so alarming, but sort of almost treated as like borderline normal within that family, that it sets just like a really bizarre tone to the whole story.
Yeah.
Right? Like, obviously, you feel a sense of unease the whole time, and I like that. Me turning pages, but for other people they might not be, you know, into that particular mood. So it's very interesting.
I feel bad for saying I didn't like Addie. It was fine. But the tone wasn't for me. Just die, Addie.
You're allowed to not like some of her books.
Yes, she's like so talented.
Yeah, sure.
I agree with you, Megan. Addie was fine. Like it was good, but it was also just fine. You know,
I don't have that level of fear of death, and so it didn't resonate with me.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so flipping and thinking of books that have done it well, like her villain series, I think has a very interesting tone.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I wouldn't even know what to call it. It's just kind of a villain's vibe.
Yeah, it's like. It's just people being terrible. So it's like, you know, who's worse, right?
But being in their heads of like, they don't think they're necessarily terrible. Like she pulls that off so well.
Well, the whole vibe of the book is like Batman standing under a streetlight, and he's somehow like improbably well lit, even though it's just completely pouring rain. Like, you know, that like comic book vibe. It's very much there.
Oh, the comic book vibe, yeah. It's so hard to like like eloquently sum up a mood or tone. Like you did that very well, but you had to literally describe a scene. Like, you know, like,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
it's hard, which I think is why like we often rely when you're trying to portray the mood and tone to like a publisher or an agent, you have to rely on comp titles. It's like, oh, you know, it's Mary Poppins, it's the Terminator. Like all you said is these two cross titles, but somebody has an instant picture in their head and a mood and a tone, you know, like
Well, it's also so hard to say like, oh, it's scary, but I'm like, scary means so many things.
yeah, very true. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of hard to, unless you're like, you know, super certain comp titles or you're like really specifically, it's the kind of terrible that like it's Batman under a street lamp at night when it's raining, but he's really well lit, but like you can't tell, like, and people are gonna be like, what? Like, what?
You're telling me that me and Kyra can't pitch our next book as it's like if you got into a horror version of the Taylor Swift meme music
Honestly,
video?
no, please do. That is fantastic, and I
you
absolutely would
You
buy
honestly should. It would be understandable.
We have some alternative.
tradition.
What's the other one we like? It's like Weekend at Bernie's meets
Weekend at
Crown of
Bernie's.
Wishes. A Crown of
meets
Wishes.
a
I think,
Crown of Wishes.
Yeah. So we've got options.
Plenty of options. Everything's falling apart, and also there's kissing.
Nice.
I thought that was the other. No, that's all.
That's the.
I was like, I
genre
thought
for everything.
that was for the other one, and I remembered it's always true for
Yeah.
us.
For all of them, your body of work.
Mhm.
It's our brand.
Yeah.
That's good. You've summed up your brand, and if you
Yeah, that is the tone.
valuable.
Why is it that, like, because it keeps coming up, but like any moods associated with the horror genre feel so much easier to explain than pretty much any other genre. So why is
That's
that?
true. I feel like
Because we can. I feel like because we all have like this very cinematic, like, it's dark, it's, you know, there's creepy music.
Yeah, well, I think that's also what we all like too. Or the
Yeah.
majority of us like reading those like weird, dark fantasy kind of things. I know, Kyra, your thing is mostly like the cute, fluffy contemporaries, but like,
No, I really like a good dark, like.
okay,
I don't write as much of it, but I definitely read it.
I think it's less subtle too, right? Like it's in your
Yeah.
face.
And it's something you don't really experience,
Well, and I
except when
think
you're
it's
very
maybe more
scared
of a
in real life.
genre- I think it's maybe more of a genre where you show up expecting like I feel like when I'm thinking about a lot of genres, I'm thinking more about like, you know, the plots. Whereas like if I want to read something dark, it's because I want to feel a certain way.
Right.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Maybe you could say like,
because-
oh, these contemporaries are like a light and fun mood, but I think that's
Right.
like maybe it's less exciting. I don't know. Like definitely people would want to go and read something that's like light or
think it's-
fun or quirky, but like it's more exciting if it's scary and dark and weird and
Because
you know.
the genre is like defined by a mood, right?
Like, 'cause you would think it would be kind of similar with romance, but it's not.
I think it's because like if you think about romance, like we have, I feel like maybe more kind of sub variety. Like I don't want to make over generalizations about horror, but it's like it's normally dark unless you're me and Megan and setting it in the Me Too music video. You know, like it's normally these things. Whereas there's less of that. So it's like with romance, like, well, this could be a Christmas romance, this could be a summer beach romance, or you know, like and so they do all have like they're all, if they're doing it right, romantic and like usually I mean there's also kind of a difference between like you have romances that it's like this is very light and fluffy, but there are also like a lot of romances where it's like this is paired with like characters who are dealing with some really heavy like trauma or personal issues, and those are going to have very, very different, like they're both romances but they're different moods.
I feel like it's the way that you want your audience to feel, regardless of what kind of horror I'm writing. I want my audience to be unsettled or scared, right?
Yeah,
like
Unsettled and Dread is kind of where I feel like that
yeah.
note is.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas romance, I haven't read a lot that isn't like, especially lately, like rom-com is kind of where I land. But like Megan, I feel like you've read more like romance books lately. Of like,
Yeah, I've read a lot of books this year, but a lot of them have been romance.
Because with romance or fantasy, you don't have a set thing you want your reader to feel. It could be any number of things, right?
Yeah.
True.
With horror, it's like my whole idea is to scare the reader in some form, some
But
shape or form.
even in the horror genre, there are different kinds of horror that come with different expectations. You know, if it's a sci-fi horror versus
Oh, for sure, yeah.
go horror, one that's more thriller, one that's more gothic. And each of those things is going to come with a different thing. But because it's such an obvious like thing that you want the reader to feel, like making someone scared it's a lot more obvious, I feel like, to me, than making someone happy.
Yeah. Well, there's like serious romance too, or there's like passionate romance, or there's the offshoot that's like, some people would disagree, but like erotica, where it's a very specific thing you want your reader to feel. It can be all under the same kind of umbrella, but there's like a very different set of emotions you could want a reader to feel going into a romance versus a fantasy, where it's like, oh, what do I want my reader to feel reading this? Who knows? I don't know. Half the time I write a fantasy. I don't know.
I just want them to have fun.
This is cool. That's what I want them to feel like.
It's the same in mysteries too. There's like cozy mysteries versus like thriller mysteries. And even in cozy, you have like a cozy witchy mystery where it's like covens who are also solving crimes. Versus like a cozy beach mystery, which is like, it's a beach, everything is chill. Also, there was a murder. Tamara Woods has a cozy beach mystery series that's very good. I've read the first book in it.
Yeah, that's interesting because like they feel cozy more than they feel mysterious of like
or murdery.
Especially like
exactly.
cozy ones. You never really feel like there's going to be a moment where your main character's life is at stake and you're up against the killer or whatever, but you never really feel that tension. Like
the real tension
there's going to be another book,
out who it is.
Yeah.
Rather than trying not to be next. Like
it's like the difference between being like solving a like tabletop puzzle and being in an escape room. One of those things is much more stressful, but they're both like puzzle solving. But one of them is more stressful.
I do think people tend to think like, oh, well, horror, it's an obvious emotion. It's an easy example to come up with, but it is extremely difficult to execute well because a lot of horror isn't, super fast paced. A lot of horror is slower and does rely on you building up dread without letting it slacken too much. And like pacing out your reveals so well. And so you think like, oh, I'll do A, B, and C, and then they'll feel the dread, and then it's done. But it's like you have to do that for 35 chapters without it feeling repetitive. So it can be really tricky to get right, even if it seems obvious at first glance how to make someone feel scared or stressed.
I feel like there's probably a note somewhere about like where mood meets theme, but I am just not a smart enough person to figure out what that note is.
Yeah.
I
think there's probably something to be said too for where mood meets suspension of disbelief. Like, how can you make your readers believe that it actually feels like that in the moment? I saw someone on Twitter did a poll recently that was like, do you prefer romances with one POV or two POVs? And like so many people said dual POV because you get like a lot more about the lives. But one of the things that I found is that I think it's harder to do well because I have a harder time suspending my disbelief that they are having a communication problem when I can see directly into both of their heads.
A lot of this is hard to articulate, I find. Like, if anyone ever asks me questions about mood, theme, tone, I'm like, I will try to articulate what
my head is spinning around a difference between Hill House and Bly Manor, but I don't know what my point is.
Okay, I have feelings about Hill House versus Bly Manor.
All right, let us have them.
So the genres are different. Obviously, like for starters, one is a gothic versus just like a more outright house wants to eat you horror. But not just that, the way it's staged is completely different. So like the house in Bly Manor is just about always well lit if it's not nighttime. You're in the same like 5 rooms. If you watch it through once, you can probably guess the layout of the house. Even there's ghosts in the background, but it's like the same 4 ghosts. Like if you're paying attention, it's the same ones, to the point where it becomes familiar, which almost creates more of a sense of loneliness rather than a sense of it being sinister.
Horrifying, yeah.
Whereas with Hill House, it's a different ghost every time. The whole thing is a maze. People are wandering around like, where the heck are we? And so I feel like just the layout of the set feels so different and creates completely different feelings that are both in the Dread family, but are not the same.
Mm-hmm. It's such a hard thing to even set tone in mood in books, because it's like you have so many things to work with. I feel like in TV or movies that we simply don't have in books. Like music is an obvious one, but like also like you were saying, it's in the same 4 rooms. We see the same 4 ghosts. We, the way that things are lit, like they have so many different things to play with to set the mood and tone. It's like, oh, what are the equivalent, for authors, for people that are writing on the page rather than showing people on the screen.
We talked a little bit about that at the very beginning of the chat, of like, especially like music, like a lot of people use music, and that's like visual and audio shorthand is like so valuable. But we also kind of discussed like, oh, it's probably how you react to the scenario. I think it was Penumbra mine mentioned the idea of like, if you have a character walking through a forest, you can set it up as 2 very different things, or a thunderstorm. Like, to some people, thunderstorms are like scary and terrifying, but to some people, they're calming and soothing. And it's kind of like how you describe the setting that makes it the mood, or that gives it the mood.
Yeah.
We've gone over the hour mark, so I think we're gonna wrap up pretty soon if anyone has any kind of final thoughts. But this has been really interesting.
Yeah. I wish with mood and tone there was a much easier, well, if you do this, you're gonna have the tone. But like so much of it is just reading so many things in so many different genres. Because if you're only reading one genre, you're only gonna recognize that one tone, and you're not gonna really know how to deviate from it at all, or how to lean into it to make it really shine.
And I do love what Kyra did a while ago. Like, she was listening to a lot of audiobooks, and the book she wrote after having listened to all these contemporaries, like, she really nicely captured that YA contemporary tone. And it felt as a reader so effortless, because it just like her brain had started thinking in that voice, which was just really cool. So there's something to be said for like immersing yourself in the mood you want. Definitely. And I find I do that accidentally way too often as well. Of like, if I'm reading an author and I'm working on a project, you can like capture the different tones through different chapters of what I was reading at the time, which is bad. But what Kyra did was cool.
Yeah, I mean, it did get to the point where because the first like draft or 2 I think I did of that book, the voice wasn't, I wasn't focusing on voice, and then I just like listened to 20, I don't know, a whole bunch of different like YA contemporary books, and I got to the point where I really could just like hear it in my head. And so then when I went to revise, like I'd be sitting there like trying to imagine it in the voice of like this particular like voice actor who does a lot of YA contemporary.
Yeah,
and it helps so much.
There's so much overlap with audiobook narrators. Like, so many romances are done by the same woman. So many of the horrors have like this same British voice.
Okay, so N. Griswold asked a great question. I think might be a tricky one. So we're going to call this our final question of the night. But Gothic is both a mood and a tone. So what would you put in the mood column versus the tone column? And would that help identify the difference between the two in any genre? Because Erin, at the beginning, we were all kind of like giving our own definitions of like mood, tone, and voice, and we didn't like specifically all agree. Of like, to each of us, it's a little different. So for you with Gothic, of like, I don't think I know enough about the genre to answer the question, but like, what is mood? What is tone? And Griswold said, Manor House seems like tone, while Depressed Widower seems like a mood.
I know that's not how they meant it, but it's a mood.
It is a mood. Yeah.
Depressed Widower. Why am I laughing at that? Okay. I honestly, like, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if I would be able to tell you if you came up to me and was like, what is mood versus what is tone? Like, I'm not sure if I would be able to differentiate between the two of them. I guess mood would maybe between characters is what I would think of maybe, and tone would be tone of the book overall, the setting, and that type of thing. But I don't know. I'm sure somebody will have a better answer in general.
Yeah, I think for me, like I mentioned at the beginning, it really for me is just like localized versus big picture. So in my head, mood is very like localized, whereas tone is big picture of the book that I happen to be writing. And so like there are often times when, you know, creepy is going to be both the mood and the tone of the book, because this scene I'm going to up the creep factor by 1. And so that's the point of it. But then other times, you know, from scene to scene, it can fluctuate. And so I'm really just looking at a few things going into each chapter. I kind of always have in my head, well, what's the book about? What's the vibe of the book? That's kind of just always on the back burner of my mind. But then at the start of each chapter, I usually think about like, who is the POV of this chapter, the point of view of this chapter? What are they feeling about the plot thing that's going to be happening? And how do I want the reader to feel about the thing that is happening to this character? And you don't always get it right in the first draft, but going back in revisions, if you're thinking about those things, I feel like it is easier to tweak the things going on in each scene so that they feel the way you want them to feel.
I like both of these comments from M.M. Ward. I think weather is a huge tone thing for authors, but also scents and textures can set a mood. And they got tired of writing winter or storm weather as stress weather, so switched to drought and wildfire.
Ooh,
So you do see winter and storms as a very specific vibe in a lot of different stories. Not always,
Sure,
but
yeah.
very often. Especially going back to Gothic, if I think like storms are very, it's like a clue of like, and now we're going in this moody direction.
It's funny. It's funny you specifically said storms actually in the comments there for Penendrum, because I was going to write middle grade. I was like trying to put together a pitch for it, and storms like feature really, really big in it. And initially it was going to be very lighthearted, tongue-in-cheek, like Percy Jackson-esque, like joking around. And then I'm like, the more I think about the storms and picture that, I'm like, I think this is going to be less lighthearted. Like, because yeah, that does set a tone, an overall tone when I think about something like that. It's like, I think this is a little more, like a little darker and a little bit more serious. So,
But you can play with it, like
True.
in Thor Ragnarok.
That's true. No, it's a good point.
All righty, this has been an absolutely fantastic discussion. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what we're talking about next week.
Is it existing on the internet? Is that our next one?
I think so.
I don't know. It's the last one that's in our like things I'm sure we remember.
Yeah, because we have existing on the internet, I'm pretty sure, and then Evelyn Hardcastle. Is
Oh, I have to get to reading that.
same.
Same.
So yeah, our book club book is in 2 weeks, ? It's the last Sunday of the month, and we are going to be talking about the 7.5 deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. It's a mystery, probably much to consider as far as tone is concerned, as isn't it all a bunch of different POVs as well?
I think so, yeah.
is,
So this
yeah.
might actually be a good one to
Talk about.
And it is existing on the internet as a writer for next week.
Wonderful. I have
All
many
right.
feelings.
Okay, thank you all so much for joining us. This has been such an interesting discussion, and we cannot wait to see you all next week. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye.